everybody for being here. I know there's a lot going on in the world, and so we appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. We hope to add some value, maybe confirm some things that you're already thinking, and hopefully add some new insights based on what we found in this study. So again, my name is Karen Bartuch. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at SipScience, and I am working from home like many of you, so you may hear a dog bark from time to time, and you may see a cat go across my screen. We're all friends here, so hopefully that's okay. But before we begin, I want to hear a little bit from you guys, so if you can in the chat, type in where you're watching this from, what city you're located in. Because I'm going to be doing most of the talking, but I absolutely want to hear from the panelists as well, or from the participants as well. Yay, Tennessee, Tallahassee. Awesome. Scottsdale, oh, one of my favorite cities. Whitefish, Dallas, Ottawa, very nice. Manhattan, Denver. We've got some good coverage. Chicago, Birmingham. Great, love it. Okay, well, I'm actually going to turn my camera off. I did want to have some camera time, and I'll come back on at the end when we do Q&A, but I'm going to turn the camera off just so you guys can focus on the slides and not my face the entire time. So the agenda for today, we've got a lot of content to cover, and we have about an hour scheduled. I promise we won't go over, but we may not even go the full hour depending on how many questions we have. But if we look at the agenda, we're going to walk through the survey methodology and demographics, as well as walk through each of the questions and insights and analysis from the survey, and then take a look at what's next, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. So we recently conducted this survey on how consumers are feeling about bars and restaurants related to COVID-19, and that's because given the industry we're in, we get a lot of questions about it, and so rather than us guess, we wanted to actually go out and talk to our customers and end users and find out how they're feeling. And as Tamara mentioned, we want to keep this somewhat interactive, even though I'll be doing a lot of the talking. So if you have comments, feel free to put them on the chat on the right-hand side, or use the Q&A function as well, which we'll get to at the end. So Tamara did an awesome job talking about what is SipScience. So as I mentioned, I'm the Chief Customer Officer, and if you're not familiar with SipScience, we are a hospitality data analytics company providing a first-to-the-world picture of what is happening inside bars and restaurants. We serve consumers, venues, which is bars and restaurants in this case, and brands. For consumers, we offer the Sip app that provides half off of drinks inside bars and restaurants so that consumers can spend less and experience more. And the app is launching in just a few weeks here. And then for bars and restaurants, we help bring in more revenue and more customers with less hassle and less spend for the bars and restaurants. And for brands, we offer data and insights on who is drinking what and where to modernize the experience so that everybody wins. And of course, data is at the center of everything we do, and so are bars and restaurants. So it was really important for us to speak to consumers about their sentiment towards bars and restaurants related to COVID-19. You know, we could speculate all we want, but it's best to actually go out and speak to consumers. So that's what we did. And so I will give a shameless plug to our app, which will be launching soon. If you want to be among the first to be able to download the app, head on over to sip-app.com and enter your email, and you'll be one of the first to know when it actually does launch. And if you are a venue, you can also sign up at the same website to become one of our partner venues. And we only partner with a small number of venues per city, so it's advantageous to sign up and be one of the first ones. And again, as a consumer, you get half off of drinks, and as a venue, you get more foot traffic and more loyal customers. So that's one of the few shameless plugs I have for SipScience, but wanted you guys to know what is forthcoming. So let's talk about the purpose of the survey. So I mentioned that we serve consumers and bars and restaurants. So when coronavirus first hit, our team was getting a lot of questions about what we think the future will be for restaurants and bars. And so one of the first things we did was launch a GoFundMe to help raise money for the hospitality industry, which was so devastatedly impacted. And then later on, we decided to launch this survey, which we're going to walk through today, to help understand how consumers feel towards bars and restaurants. And it's actually very timely because right now states are starting to open up and people are starting to dine in at restaurants again. So if we look at the purpose overall of the survey, it's to, one, ensure the safety of consumers inside bars and restaurants. We know there's a lot of concern that people have, and we want to be able to allay people's fears physically and mentally. And two, we want to help bars and restaurants prepare for reopening and long-term success. Again, a lot of places are in the middle of this right now, but there's, I think, some little nuances that we're going to talk through today that can really help set up these bars and restaurants for long-term success. You might be doing everything right, but you don't know how the customer feels, and that's some of the things that we're going to talk through today. And then lastly, we want to leverage data to make informed decisions. And again, that's really at the heart of everything that SipScience does, is we want to take an evidence-based approach to leadership and problem solving. Is everybody able to see my slides? I'm seeing some traffic about the slides. People are not able to see it. Okay, great.
I can see the slides. Blaine
Okay.
is saying no. Blaine, are you in a full screen? That might be helpful.
And we will send the slides out afterwards, and we're also recording this as well. Okay, but I will assume that everybody else can see my slides. If not, I'll try to talk a little bit more to the slides. Okay, great.
Wait,
All right, so.
Real quick, Blaine, can you put your email in the chat and I'll email you the Zoom link? Maybe a refresh might be helpful. I'm so sorry. All right.
No problem. There's always a technical issue on every call I'm on, so no worries. So let's talk data. I'm very excited. Obviously, SipScience, we love data. I'm all about surveys, and so we are really excited to walk through the findings, and hopefully you are as well. So if we look at the methodology behind the survey that we conducted, it was a 37-question survey, including some criteria questions and demographic questions, and we used the platform SurveyMonkey. The survey took about 5 minutes to complete, and we garnered participants via a convenience sample, meaning we sent the survey to our email distribution list and promoted on our social media channels, and that's how we got our participants. So most of the questions were using a 5-point Likert scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree, and you'll see that in some of the charts and data that we have. But we also use some open text questions as well to dig into that sentiment, and those are really my favorite because we understand what the sentiment is, but if you look at the qualitative data, we're able to really understand why that sentiment is, why somebody feels strongly one way or strongly against something. We're able to dig into that, and we'll see some of the qualitative text responses today. And then we did offer an incentive because, you know, people's inboxes are inundated with surveys. So we did offer a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card as part of the incentive to take the survey. And we actually gave away 2 of them because we had such a great response to our survey. We were aiming for 150 participants, and we had almost double that at 295 participants. And the criteria to complete the survey was pretty simple. You needed to be 21 years old and reside in the United States. So I'll briefly talk through the demographics just to give you a sense of who the participants were. So if you look at that first chart, it shows the age ranges from 21 to 65 plus, with the biggest percentage 25 to 34-year-olds. The second chart shows the male-female split, which was 62% call it female and about 38% male, which isn't too bad as far as the gender split. And then we had participants from across the US, with the majority from Tennessee, Illinois, Washington, Texas, and Michigan. And then the salary, which is not listed up there, we ranged from $35,000 annually to $150,000 annually. And participants spent on average $25 to $500 per month on alcohol. Okay, so this next slide, so there's a lot of good nuggets throughout this presentation. And again, some of it's confirming things that we already know or that might be obvious, but it's still good to have that backed up by evidence. But there were some interesting kind of ahas that came out of this. And I thought about waiting until the very end of the presentation to give them out, but then I thought that wouldn't be very nice. So we'll start with our 4 big insights that came out of this survey, and we'll end that way as well. So the first one is communication. So consumers are, of course, expecting restaurants and bars to follow CDC guidelines and take precautionary measures, but consumers are also expecting communication from the bars and restaurants on what is being done to keep them safe. They want to see it and feel it and know the procedures that are taking place. And that's something that is no cost to the venue or bar or restaurant to be able to communicate what it is they're doing. Second, there's a tremendous concern about the handling of money and credit cards, or really anything for that matter. And contactless payment is overwhelmingly desired and expected by consumers. And then third is deals. So due to limited budgets and unemployment, consumers are expecting bars and restaurants to offer deals. And because consumers are hesitant to go back inside bars and restaurants, deals are a great way to kind of draw them in. Everybody loves a good deal. And then lastly, and this one cuts across all three of this, is trust. So consumers' concerns around, they're concerned about the unknown and whether or not people are following protocols. And of course, what is the communication around protocols? So that indicates that there's a lack of trust. People have also mentioned, and we'll talk through some of this, that they want a third-party validation that protocols are being followed. And they want to know that people behind the scenes are doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as cleanliness and protocols. And so that indicates a lack of trust. So one of the trust studies that I like to look at is done by a PR agency called Edelman, and they do it every year. It's called the Trust Barometer. And actually for this year's Trust Barometer, two things that they called out that were really important when it came to trust were competence and ethics, which are the major dimensions of trust. And I think that comes into play on what people are looking for when it comes to COVID-19 and reopening restaurants. They want to know that people are competent in doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as protocols, but also that they're doing the ethical thing and making sure that other people are safe. So we'll talk through all that a little bit more. But those are the four big insights: communication, contactless payment, deals, and trust. Any questions or reactions to that? Feel free to put it in the chat. If not, I will continue going. Great. Okay, so we'll dig into some of the questions. So we wanted to have a snapshot of who the participants were and their behaviors during the quarantine. So one of the first questions we asked them is, did you order carry-out food during the quarantine, and did you purchase carry-out alcohol? And interestingly, 93% purchased carry-out food. No surprise there. People are relying on carry-out, obviously, during this time. But then 37% purchased carry-out alcohol. And so it's important to note here that several states temporarily loosened regulations so that venues could actually sell carry-out alcohol with somewhat varying restrictions. Some were able to actually take drinks and put them in like a fountain drink type cup, and some were not able to do that. So there's varying restrictions around the carry-out alcohol, and those regulations were temporarily loosened. My slides. And then it's also worth noting that during the quarantine, alcohol consumption was up overall and with our participants. So according to Nielsen, off-premise, meaning you bought alcohol at either a liquor store or a grocery store, was up overall, approximately 27% during the quarantine. And then if you look at our participants, we asked them if they consumed more alcohol than they normally would, and 67% said that yes, they consumed more alcohol than they normally would during the quarantine.
Karen,
Yes.
there's a couple of questions in the comments. One from Garrett. What was the regional breakdown of the survey populations? One from Dawn. What about the talent of the mixologists?
Okay, yeah. So the regional breakdown of the survey population, we can send that out afterwards. I don't have a slide with that data, but we can certainly pull that and give the breakdown. We actually have it by city and state. Sure. And the talent of the mixologist. Well, I feel like I've become a mixologist in the quarantine, so I don't know that we can speak to that, but but maybe at our next one, Tamara, where we have some mixologists on. So we also asked participants what their future intentions were and future behavior were, because at the time we were asking this, we didn't know when restaurants were going to be opening, so it was a bit of an unknown. So we asked them about future behavior. Once the quarantine is lifted, I plan to dine in at restaurants. And overwhelmingly 64% said that yes, they do plan on dining in at restaurants. And so this is obviously extremely timely, given that many states are opening up right now. And this is good news for restaurants, which were obviously among the hardest hits. But then if we look to the same question about bars, it's a little less overwhelming. So we asked the same question: once the quarantine is lifted, I plan to patronize bars. And that means actually sit inside a bar and have at least one drink. And the response was less overwhelming, still over 50%. And we'll talk through why that is when we dig into some of the other questions around this. There's some real clear-cut concerns when it comes to bars and behavior in bars that we'll talk through on why this is a little less overwhelming. So of course, we asked about concerns about the safety of dining in restaurants, and 60% agree that yes, they have concerns about the safety of dining in restaurants, and 24% disagree, and the rest are neutral. So as a restaurant owner, this is significant. You want someone to come into your facility and feel safe. And if you recall, communication is one of the 4 big insights, ahas, that we got out of the study, and something that every restaurant owner can do at no cost that will help quell some of this concern. So we recommend actually over communicating how you're keeping your restaurant employees and customers safe. People really want to know what the process is and what steps you're taking to keep them safe. So on the same question, we also ask, please, this is the qualitative part where we ask open text, please describe your concerns about the safety of dining inside restaurants. And so the word cloud, the bigger the word, means that that word was mentioned more often than the other words. And so there's no surprise here that being around people, cleanliness, too many people, these are the obvious concerns that most people have talked about and expressed. But we'll dig into more on this next slide on what those actual concerns are. So this is where we ask open text for them to describe their concerns. And these are verbatim from the participants. I did not alter any language. These are quotes that I pulled out. And if I pulled out a quote, that means that it was mentioned many, many times, just in a different way. But I pulled out the quotes that had the most detail. So the concerns they described are employees and servers not following proper protocols to ensure cleanliness, cleanliness procedures being consistent, sanitation and cleanliness of the restaurant, but also the other patrons. And so we mentioned trust before in communication. And so this kind of not knowing what other people are doing or relying on other people, the whole idea of trust keeps coming up. But then if we look at other responses, these are the more obvious ones. So germs and asymptomatic people, too many people in one spot, and social distancing not enforced, and then the second wave of the coronavirus. So no surprise on those, but the ones in the brighter green are more around the trust and relying on other people to keep me safe. And so then we also wanted to ask what actions would ease your concerns, because I'm sure there's things that we aren't thinking about or, haven't been discussed yet. So we wanted to put it out to people for their ideas. And again, you can see in the word cloud, the obvious responses such as vaccine, testing, social distancing, outdoor seating. But then if we dig into those responses a little bit more, we start to see more around communication and the importance of communication. For instance, outdoor seating and proper social distancing, but also communication about procedures and protocols, posting or notifications and visual cues of the cleaning process or posting of a schedule. And then we start to see some responses around contactless payment. So ordering via an app, continuation of contactless experience. And then the last one, approval by a third party that the facility is clean and following protocols. So that goes back to the whole trust thing where people want to know that the restaurant is taking the right steps, and they want a third party to validate it, whether it's an inspector was mentioned or the government. They want some third party validation to trust what's going on inside the venue. And so we have similar questions, just pointed it at a bar instead of a restaurant. And so slightly higher percentage of participants are concerned about the safety of drinking inside a bar, and we'll talk through why that is in just a moment. So it's higher than compared to the restaurant. So again, when we look at the word cloud, common responses, the crowd, social distancing, people, cleanliness, close quarters, those are kind of the typical responses that people are talking about and the obvious ones. But then if we dig into those responses, we see a little bit more detail on what is really driving that concern. So I'm concerned about being in tight spaces and close proximity to others. So that's obviously in a bar, it's a different setting. So that close proximity keeps coming up. Not able to social distance and being around drunk people who will not social distance. After drinks, people won't wash their hands or maintain social distancing. If I drink, I might relax my cleanliness standards. After a couple of drinks with inhibitions lowered, people won't follow CDC protocols. And too many people too close. So really when it comes to a bar, the close proximity and then the fact that people's inhibitions get lowered when they're drinking is the main concern, and why there is more concern when it comes to going to a bar. There was actually a funny response that I didn't put in there. Tamara, did you have something to?
Yeah, there's a question. Someone just messaged us a question.
Oh,
Was there any in your, in your review, were there any questions about a bartender touching the drink being of concern?
yes, actually there were a lot of comments about that. A lot of comments about any item being touched, and we're going to talk a little bit about money and credit cards, but there were also comments in the open text about bartenders washing their hands, touching the glasses, forks, knives, plates. There was a lot of concern about that. Basically anything that can go from person to person, people were concerned about. And I see there's a question about gloves. So there was mention of gloves as an action to make people feel safer, but you'll see on the very last slide, we actually asked about masks and gloves, and there was some hesitance for people to wear gloves, which is interesting given all the concern. But we'll get to that at the end. So again, for bars, people are concerned about that close proximity and then lowering your inhibitions once you've had a couple cocktails. So for bars, it is critical, again, going back to that communication, to communicate the importance of following the guidelines and how to follow the guidelines, especially when drinking alcohol. Perhaps some in-venue signage or other reminders would be helpful, or perhaps limiting the number of drinks, which may not be ideal for a bar, but limiting the number of drinks so that you don't get to that point where you start to compromise your cleanliness standards. So we did dig in and ask what would ease their concerns. And, some people said nothing, like, hey, it's nothing's going to ease my concern. I'm not going to visit a bar for a while. But some said the obvious answers, like social distancing, a vaccine, more space, more of the obvious responses. But then my favorite, the qualitative responses, where people type it in, we start to see a little bit more detail. So communication on what the bar is doing to keep me safe, frequent checks by inspectors to check for compliance, patron count limits and sitting outdoors, limited amount of people at a certain time, designated space, 2 to 3 drinks per person, clear demarcation of physical space, communications showing they're taking steps to prevent exposure and transmission of COVID, and educating customers on things being done, cleaning, social distancing, etc. So again, you start to see a lot around communication and that trust factor, where they want a third party to come in and say, yes, things are being done right. But also, customers also just want to know, they want to be in the know, like what is happening, why is it happening, and is it enough, so that they can judge for themselves. So it's again coming down to that communication and then trust. And in my opinion, the communication is going to lead to the trust long term. So it's really, really important for bars and restaurants to almost over communicate at this point. And so actually, given that we're talking a lot about communication and the fact that we have Tamara on the line, I'm going to have her just pipe up for a moment. She is our publicist and an amazing communications expert, and she's got some free resources around COVID-19. So Tamara, do you want to just talk to that, given that we're talking so much about communication?
Yeah, really there's 2 things. I think this goes for any person, brand, anything. So depending on where you're at in the supply chain. 2 things, right? One, and this is all just my opinion, my expertise. On the onset of COVID, I advised all my clients, number 1, articulate, communicate, express, let people know your business hours, how they've changed, and internal and external communications. Your staff, your team needs to know what's going on. Your customers need to know if the lights are on, if the hours change, if the menu's limited, the product is not going to ship on time, whatever the case may be. People just need a heads up. We all I think appreciate a heads up versus waiting for something, or wondering or showing up and it not being there. The second piece of communications is this idea of a campaign, right? If you think of like Taco Tuesday, or Women Crush Wednesday, these very like cheeky kind of themes, I think now need to be doubled down on how you're maintaining standards, what you're doing, show people behind the curtain on what you're doing to go the extra mile. We wear masks. We are cleaning, right? Our factory, our inventory, we're changing our protocol. Those are all very, very good things to be showcasing. And there might be a lot of uncertainty in both of those ideas, but limiting language is always perfectly okay. I have a manufacturing client that there was a lot of uncertainty going on. So we said, we're doing our best. We're taking every step. So those kinds of things. So I'll just kind of pause there on the comms front, on the community. And when I say comms, I mean, you don't need a publicist, especially for those of you who have restaurants and you're growing, you're scaling, maybe you don't have a publicist yet. Social media is a great tool. If you have email marketing is the best tool to reach your customer or your audience.
Great, thanks, Tamara. And I see we had some questions come up in the chat, so I'll just address those before we go. So the question was, did you ask how the bars and restaurants would enforce the CDC guidelines? So actually, when we launched the survey, the guidelines were unclear and being rolled out. So we did not ask that, but our next session, which I'll talk about at the end, is actually going to be about best practices and protocols. And so we'll be able to dig into that more in the next session, because I think people are also still figuring it out. Okay. So then we also wanted to ask about the exchange of money and credit cards, given that's an integral part of going to a restaurant and really where a lot of the concern is. So when we asked about concern, 31% of participants expressed concern with money, saying that germs, the virus, money's dirty to begin with, are big concerns. And then when we dig into that a little bit more, some of the responses are, none too surprising, but cash is filthy to start with. Credit card machines are contaminated. Giving your card to someone else could cause spread. Frequent checks by inspectors to check for compliance. So again, we're going back to that third-party validation and trust that people are doing the right thing. Money handling potentially spreading COVID-19. Exchanging money and cash can spread germs and COVID-19. Once it is out of sight, you are not sure if it has been contaminated. So again, going back to that trust factor, we don't know what we don't see, we don't know, we can't verify that things are being done the right way. And then going back to our other aha around contactless payments, I want transactions to be contact-free, and using cash obviously is not contact-free. So then we asked what actions would ease your concern, and it was a pretty overwhelming response. Almost every single qualitative response said that contactless payment would be the way to ease your concerns as far as exchanging money. And so I said I may have a few other shameless plugs for SipScience, so I will just say that our app does offer contactless payment inside bars and restaurants. So then we also asked separately about credit card transactions, similar to money, but we wanted to separate out the two concepts. And 29% of participants expressed concern with exchanging their credit card when paying inside a bar or restaurant. And if we look at what the concerns are, it's very similar to what we've seen elsewhere. Oops. And that's germs, touching, contact, the virus. And then when we look into the qualitative responses, we start to see a little bit more detail. So if a server owner takes a credit card and has COVID-19, they could transmit it to me via my card. Even if I wipe it down after, the damage could already be done. I don't know how clean another person is or who they have served before me. Indirect contact can transmit this. So again, going back to the trust factor. Need touchless payment, okay to hand card over, but no signing. Too many people touching equipment, especially when it is not wiped down. Are hand washed in between handling my card. Having wait staff handle credit cards after they have handled the credit cards from other customers in the same trip to the checkout. So all things that we're all thinking, but again, it comes back down to that communication, contactless payment, and the trust factor. And then again, we asked what actions would ease your concerns when it comes to handing your credit card over, and it was an overwhelming response that the contactless payment was the way to do that. And so I will shamelessly plug our app once again, SIP, which is launching shortly, but we do offer that inside bars and restaurants. And we knew it was a good thing before all of this happened, but now in the wake of COVID, it's actually even more important than we thought it would be, because it obviously eliminates the need to even have money or a credit card with you. So then we asked about how participants would prefer to order inside a bar or restaurant, and 31% said that they prefer to order food via an app or kiosk, and 26% said that they prefer to order drinks via an app or kiosk. So given all the concerns, those numbers actually seem a little bit low, but I think that we can attribute that because people are so used to ordering in person, face-to-face, that's why it's a little bit lower. But I will say the demand for technology is growing, and other studies show that consumers want convenience and their own contactless terms. In fact, a different study conducted by Blue Dot, which is another tech company, showed that 77% of participants ordered food, groceries, and other items via apps, and over 50% downloaded at least one food-related app during the quarantine. So the trend is absolutely toward technology. Of course, there needs to be adoption and a great user experience and all of that, but the trend is toward technology. And I think COVID obviously amplified that and expedited it. So then we wanted to understand the financial picture. So we know that millions of Americans are unemployed, the highest in history, and the government, is of course issuing stimulus checks. So we know that this is an issue for many people. And so we asked our participants, and 38% of our participants confirmed that they are on a limited budget as a result of the quarantine. And if we take a look at spending overall, McKinsey management consulting firm did a study, and they forecasted that post-crisis spending on in-restaurant dining is expected to be lower than pre-crisis levels. No surprise there. But they attribute it largely because consumers will still be wary of being in densely populated public spaces, but also because they're saving money by eating and drinking at home. They did, however, say that the demand for takeout is expected to return to pre-crisis levels pretty quickly. And then we also asked about deals and the expectation of deals for bars and restaurants, especially given that we thought that we would see limited budgets as a result of the quarantine. And 43% of participants expect bars and restaurants to offer deals. And, again, this makes sense given limited budgets, but also given that people are so skittish to go back into restaurants, this is going to be a good way to help lure customers back in. And, everybody loves a good deal. And so hopefully this will help people get over that resistance to wanting to go back inside restaurants and bars. And then we asked about the frequency of patronizing bars and restaurants. And so 48% said that they plan to go to bars with the same frequency as before the quarantine. And actually, surprisingly, 48% said they plan to go to restaurants with the same frequency. So it's a little bit contradictory in the concern level data that we had. But if we look at their intention and frequency, it's around the same when it comes to bars and restaurants. It's obviously going to take some time before we see the same frequency as pre-quarantine. But these numbers are in line with the McKinsey projections that show that it will take time for spending to get back to pre-quarantine levels. And then we did want to ask about physical safety measures, just because even when I go to the grocery store, I'm like, do I need the gloves? Do I not need the gloves? Some people are not wearing a mask, some people are wearing a mask. And so we wanted to understand the importance of that to consumers. And so surprisingly, 20% said that they would wear gloves, while 51% said that they would wear a mask. So despite there being tremendous concern voiced about transmission of virus and touching and people, participants are really looking externally for someone to take the measures to keep them safe versus putting the onus on themselves to stay safe. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there on how they really want to see other people taking the measures, and they themselves are maybe not going to take the measures. So 20% on the gloves, 51% on the mask.
Karen, I'm just going to read a comment from Kurt that says, one of the concerns I've heard multiple times from restaurants is asymptomatic patrons, and do waiters and waitresses change gloves from table to table after each contact? So just adding that to the conversation.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, even when they're touching a credit card and with the same gloves that then they're serving your food with. So I think that will be something that we address in the next webinar, when we have more restaurants that have opened and more places that have put in place different protocols and things. So that will, I think, be for the next session for sure. So just in summary, the four big insights out of this survey, we confirmed some things that all of us were already thinking, but then I think the kind of ahas that came out of it were the importance of communication on what is being done, the contactless payment to limit interaction and touching, the expectation of deals by consumers, given the current state of economic affairs and unemployment, and just overall the importance of trust moving forward. And of course, that's not going to happen overnight, but I do think that's something that as a restaurant or brand, you can start to build. And that first step is really communication. So any other questions? And if people want to go on camera, we're happy to have you come off camera and we can answer any questions that you might have. I know I kind of zip through a lot of data, but happy to take any other questions. Okay, I see a question from Garrett about, did our survey discuss the items being served? Is there more trust in single serve products such as beer in can versus wine in a cocktail in a glass? We didn't get into that level of minutia on the items being served, but I do think that that is something for the future, and perhaps something that we could talk about in the next one, because we'll have representatives actually from restaurant groups on that call. I believe we have, should I say the name, Tamara, or not yet, of the restaurant group that we were hoping to have?
I'll just say tentatively, we're working with Ditka's Steakhouse, the national brand, a food critic at the LA Times, US Bartenders Guild Foundation. So it's actually a lot of folks were supposed to be part of the discussion today, and with everything going on, they decided to, we're all just going to reschedule for another one. So we sort of shifted gears. So we're going to go into some deeper questions and hear from folks from all different sides of the industry. And that should be June 24th. So I'll follow up with everyone over email about how we're going to move forward there.
Yeah, and I think that's a good one. And we'll actually obviously take into account all of the questions that we're getting here today and have the panel address that.
Yeah, there's a question, two questions I'll read, Karen. From Don, did you ask for product ideas or have questions for app features, co-branded sip, and an N95 mask with integrated straws or venues? And then from Graceful Beam, did age or gender play into the answers as much?
Yeah, so great question on the product ideas. So we, as much as we would love for this webinar to be a, SipScience commercial, we actually wanted to make sure that we were adding value to restaurants and venue bar owners versus making it, wholly self-serving for us as a company. So we didn't ask about the app features, but certainly some things have come out of the survey that, may end up in our roadmap somewhere. And then the other question about age and gender. So I'm going to do some additional statistical analysis, some perhaps ANOVAs, to see if in fact gender or age played a role. And my hypothesis would be that the older population has different concerns than the younger populations, but we didn't do that for this readout, but absolutely we can do that. And then Garrett's, yes, we will not forget you, Garrett, on sending the survey population. We'll absolutely do that. Okay, great. Any other questions then on the data? Great, well, we appreciate you joining. And just before we go, if you want a little bit more about SipScience and our platform, we do have a white paper on our beta test. So you can go to sip-app.com and download that white paper and get more detail on how we serve bars and restaurants. And then of course, go to sip-app.com to sign up and be one of the first to download the app, which is coming very, very soon.
Awesome. I'll also plug Sip Science on the PR front. We as an entire team decided to start raising money to support bartenders and folks in the hospitality industry that are perhaps among the most affected as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just put in the chat the link. And so please consider donating or sharing it. All of the proceeds go to the U.S. Bartenders Guild Foundation. They have a program for the Bartenders Emergency Response Program. So bartenders can go fill out the application and receive dollars, which is really, really nice. And then, yep, sipapp.com. I plugged that into the chat as well.
Yeah, and great. I see a question from Blaine about downloading and using the app. I assume you mean the SIP app that we offer. So we actually did a separate body of research around our app with consumers, and the contactless payment, the walletless payment are all really big value adds that, again, we weren't necessarily looking on as the primary reason for people wanting our app, but after doing research, we realized that actually that is a really good thing that people want with our app. So, our main value prop is that we offer up to half off on drinks, but then the fact that you're out and you don't have to have a wallet, you can close out your tab when you want, you don't have to wait in line with the bartender, you don't have to accidentally leave your credit card at the bar, several times a year. So there's all sorts of other benefits that come along with our app. So it was a great question. So yeah, if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me at karen.bartuch@sipscience.com and check out our two sites, sipscience.com or sipapp.com. And then follow us on social media. We have a ton of content out there, white papers, videos, all sorts of studies and blogs. So we really appreciate you taking the time. And I think all of the chat will download this chat, and this will feed into the next webinar that we have, which is more around best practices inside bars and restaurants. And I think we'll even, Tamara, touch on some of the communication efforts that are hitting home, because again, that's something easy and free that restaurants can do to help quell some of the concerns that people have and hopefully bring more people into the venues. Okay, so I promised we wouldn't go over an hour. So we did not go over an hour. We can hang around for a little bit if people have more specific questions.
Thanks everyone for joining. We'll stay on for 5 more minutes with any questions, just to kind of back and forth, but see about 15 people on right now. So thank you for staying here through the duration of our presentation. Question came in. Oh, looks like Chris, our co-CEO, is answering a few questions as well. Chris Boros. Did anyone mention, Don asked, did anyone mention being able to arrange for a safe ride home? I think that's a great question. And Chris responded, logistics and integrations will be next in features releases, among many others. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes up a lot. Thank you, Ellie. Oh, and then I see a question about the consumers and their expectations of a third-party validator. Yeah, so within the comments, I read through every single one of them, pages and pages, and they either mentioned an inspector, the government coming in, or some third-party organization that would, give the blessing that the restaurant is doing things the way they're supposed to be doing. Yeah, they don't know who, but they want something, because the bottom line is they're not trusting that the restaurant is going to do enough to keep them safe. Yes, good question, Blaine. So the key is, will they download? We are hoping that they will download and use the SIP app. Yes. Oh, that's another good comment from Kurt. Do you think there will be some type of label or certificate to post from the third party? Yeah, I mean, if you look on Yelp, you see now the health scores and the health assessments on the Yelp. So people want to see what's happening inside the restaurants, and, from that third party. So I mean, that could potentially be something that we see in the future. And again, I think this is actually a question for the next panel that's coming up for the folks that are actually in bars and restaurants to get their take on it. Good. Okay. Well, this was a super engaged group, so we appreciate it. We were excited about the data. It sounds like you guys are also excited about the data, so that's good.
I'll be sending an email to everyone who registered with a link to this presentation and a recording. Please check in with us on LinkedIn. That's probably our most up-to-date channel at all times. So that's the latest and greatest from us at SIP. And I see some more questions coming in. What are key metrics you see for trust? I think that's a great conversation starter for our next event, which will be June 24th. I'll be announcing the details as soon as I have everyone confirmed. So thanks everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Karen, for all your great research.
You got it. Thank you.